And we want to turn to another crucially important issue. That is the trial of the 3 killers of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And we are very happy to be joined with the Atlanta-based journalist and host of the podcast, The Way with ANOA CHANGA. ANOA, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side. No, very happy to have you here. And, there's so much that can be said about the trial, but the thing that I just keep sitting with, ANOA, is the defense of how they're saying, well, look, at least Travis McMichaels' lawyer is saying this, they were going to make a legal citizen's arrest or whatever. And it's just like this long history of vigilante violence in America. And I thought, regardless of whatever the statute is, and I definitely don't think they were in conformity with it, just the idea that they just felt they had the right on a whim, basically, to track someone down, try to arrest them, and when they, essentially try to defend themselves against vigilantes, just murder them right down there in the street. I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just keep sitting with how they feel so right with what they did.
Well, nothing in the prior citizen's arrest statute gave them the right to do what you just described, Eugene. That is tracking down a jogger on foot in their trucks with shotguns, right? Something out of an old-timey, racist, pre-lynching exercise, right? Nothing in the existing law gave them that right. And also what Ahmaud Arbery was allegedly accused of would have been trespassing, which was only a misdemeanor. And one of the cops testified earlier on that would have actually been something that would have been given a verbal warning about. But it also was an issue when you look at the footage of the site itself. You see that multiple people, whether you've done this yourself, I actually have done this. You see a construction site, you look around, you see the new builds going up. It was something that actually very commonly happened in that neighborhood, not with Black people, apparently, is really what the issue is. You saw a white couple on camera. You saw a couple other people on camera, multiple different people, not just Ahmaud. He never touched anything. You actually see people on some of the video footage touching things on the construction site, right? So this idea that they were doing this community service, we saw the same thing with George Zimmerman, the overzealous community watch type of attitude, mentality, and this idea that because you're a good guy with a gun, that you're entitled to do any and every action it takes to stop what's the perceived Black guy. But the other thing I would say about this is the citizen's arrest statute has been very affirmatively updated. It didn't get completely repealed, but it was updated, which was a big push and somewhat of a win down here. But the citizen's arrest logic actually comes from the first 2 prosecutors in this case, right? There's no indication that any of the 3 individuals actually argued or alleged or tried to claim that this was a citizen's arrest prior to that information being made publicly. So we first hear of this citizen's arrest bill come from George Barnhill, who was the second prosecutor to actually handle this case before it was taken out of his hands as well. And he wrote a very lengthy letter describing why this was citizen's arrest, distorting facts and evidence that they already had at the time. So not just are these 3 people on trial, but really that entire Southern Georgia judicial criminal system for the prosecutors, et cetera, and the cops, it's all on trial in terms of the Ahmaud Arbery case.
Anoa, I'm glad you mentioned George Zimmerman, because it seems to be coming up again and again, right? The situation where people commit murder, they commit a blatant act of murder, but because they murdered somebody who's Black and there's a racist tinge to it, obviously, and the murderers happen to be white, it's everything's backwards. The person who's murdered is the one who ends up on trial. Did they give them a reason to murder them? It seems like a pattern that we are seeing here. It's again and again. Why are we even discussing? I just can't think of other murder cases where it's being discussed. It's usually the person trying to say it was either an accident or no, it wasn't me, I'm being framed. Not, okay, yeah, I totally did it, but I was right and it's self-defense. This seems to be an ongoing pattern. It's incredibly disturbing. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of this? Is that becoming normal?
What I think we're seeing more so right now, and I think it's pretty raw right now because we have both the Rittenhouse and this trial happening at the same exact time. We have 4 vigilantes, arguably 4 white supremacist vigilantes, all on trial at the same time, making very similar disparaging, comments about the people that they killed, as well as claiming that they had no choice, they had to do it with self-defense. I mean, it's really wild that you get to claim self-defense when you are aiming a gun at someone else, right? And they're trying to make a lot about how Ahmaud may have tried to take a gun from one of the McMichaels in particular. I mean, if you're pointing a gun at me and I don't know who the hell you are, yes, I'm going to try and disarm you and save my own life. If anyone was acting in self-defense, it's clearly, Ahmaud Arbery in this case from all the facts that we have available. But I think to your point about, is it becoming more commonplace? I mean, this is actually getting back to the bread and butter of what America is. Rania, you and I know that our people who look like us, if they're on the wrong end of a gun, it's not going to end pretty. And if we're on the other end of the gun, it's still not going to end well, right? When we look at the ability of people of color, Black folks in particular, their ability to claim self-defense when the defendant whether the victim is Black or white, it's abysmal in comparison to their white counterparts. I don't remember the exact stats, but I know it's come up when we saw, the conversation around stand your ground. Stand your ground specifically is a little bit of a peculiar bastardization, for lack of a better phrasing, of traditional self-defense law. When you think about traditional self-defense law, there's usually a duty to retreat, right? When in a situation, you're usually not the person escalating under, the idea of, when you have the capsule doctrine, that's like when you're in your house. And in some places, in some cases, they've even found that people have a duty to de-escalate it, even when they're at home, which has been a peculiar deviation from the norm. So the armed person who's escalating conflict to then turn around and try and say, no, we weren't really doing that. But it's also really grounded in this perception that anyone who's Black, brown, anyone who's non-white there is reasonable suspicion, not only to detain or suspect them of a crime, but to take any means necessary to stop them from the perception. Because really what it is that perceived othering that happens within someone's head has already been, we've seen across our judicial system that type of perception, that type of scrutiny is acceptable, whether it's the Supreme Court cases. There's a line of criminal procedure cases out of the Supreme Court that have found that Black men in a car in DC is reasonable suspicion enough for cops to stop them. That type of mentality permeates throughout, white communities in general. Not saying all white people, for folks who are white in the audience who may get a little upset about that type of stuff, but it's a very real thing that we're trying to cut through. So, we also saw this post 9/11 with the increased surveillance and suspicion, when we're talking specifically of people who are perceived to be Muslim or of Arabic descent, the way in which we had antagonism from not just police, but vigilantes who thought they were doing the American patriotic thing. We're going after people. So this is really more about what we have seen throughout American history and the way in which white vigilantes have been empowered by the justice system to take action. And that continues on, particularly when we're talking about some of these smaller Southern communities or smaller communities that exist outside of maybe some of the more larger urban centers that have had to grapple with these issues in previous years.
A little bit of Noah, and sorry. I was hoping you could actually talk about that last aspect a little bit there, Noah, that you mentioned in terms of demographics, because it's a big conversation about Georgia, as many conversations in politics, a little overplayed, but, Georgia's changing. It's got all these demographic changes. It's not like these other Southern states. It's a new place and all these other pieces. But as you say, this is really drawing us back to maybe the Georgia that many people know. I don't know if that was ever representative of everyone there, of course, but certainly that long racist history. Where do you think this sort of situates us in that conversation? Was it overblown to begin with, or how are you seeing that?
Oh, no. I think the demographic conversation is a very real one. And that is how we're going to be able to build the coalition power to move folks forward for those who engage in electoral politics, right? I think it has a very real conversation. We do see new leaders emerging. I actually, just before coming on with you all, just saw a tweet that a friend of mine's, a teenager, has their first article in Teen Vogue writing about the school board fights that are happening right now over race and diversity issues issues and things of that nature. So we have this whole group of young people that are raising their voices in a very real way because they're seeing the importance and value of that organizing. So we do have the diversity, but what I think we have is we still have these segments of the country, and they're not just like, a deliverance type, throwbacks. I mean, these are very real communities that still have people who are very entrenched in their power bases. So the two original prosecutors that I mentioned, you had two prosecutors who originally in the Ahmaud Arbery case, who both touched this case and did everything in their power to keep these men from not even going to jail, but from being arrested, being arraigned, talking to police, anything. They squashed everything until it was the community that got the third and then finally the fourth. This is the fourth. We are on the fourth prosecutorial team now. So I don't think that the demographic conversation, just like nationally, is not a problem. I do think that there is a wing within the country that is harping on this white fear or this fear of the Black or browning of America in a way that has people doing ridiculous stuff, like trying to get mistrials because there are Black preachers comforting the family and the audience, right? I mean, we're seeing there is no veil anymore. There is no pretend that somehow we're in this modern era and people don't still have these beliefs or have these still attitudes that we thought were left behind in the 60s, 70s. I mean, you and I didn't think that, but I think a lot of the country has been confused because being blatantly racist has been like verboten for so many decades now. And now we have seen this rescinding where it's okay to be white and proud in the way that we see a Kyle Rittenhouse, in the way that we see the McMichaels and Bryan acting in terms of how they're, taking care of their communities. So the demographic thing is a very real conversation. The shift is very real and we're seeing it, but it also helps empower people who are in these more rural communities to start doing the organizing and the supports. Because what I do think is important about a state like Georgia and the resources that started coming into Georgia around the 2020 election is that we then saw organizations be able to spend more time and energy in places down like Brunswick and Glenn County, down in Southwest Georgia. We're seeing people spread out more because that's what really needs to happen. People in more of these rural communities, whether they're white, whether they're Black, whomever, folks need resources and support to do this work to help root out some of these people who remain in these positions of power, like George Barnhill, who will be up for re-election in 2022. Jackie Johnson, the first prosecutor, was actually unseated in part because people got behind a write-in challenger to be able to unseat her, in particular after this specific case happened.
Well, that's very interesting to know, and I think a really important point. I appreciate you giving us that context. And just thinking about the Black pastor piece, and last thing here before we let you go. I mean, it almost feels like it's like psychological terrorism from the defense. I mean, I agree with you. It's definitely a tactic, but just seeing him repeat this over and over, I've been thinking about the family of Ahmaud Arbery and just everyone who's there. I mean, it almost feels like a terror tactic. I know some people might say I'm saying too much with the way too many Black people in the jury room, too many pastors comforting the family. I mean, their son, loved one is dead. I mean, it was, I guess I can't say it's unbelievable, but I mean, I just was so struck by it.
Yeah, I mean, especially when it's the thought of a sobbing Black mother who is reliving and forced to relive the murder of her child, right? And is being comforted, and that of itself is also a part of the problem for the jury. I mean, nowhere have I seen the white family or any family being told that the fact that they might be in the audience and sobbing to themselves, not like she's, being dramatic and like wailing hysterically or anything like that. I mean, it's hard as news people to interact with this footage. I can't imagine being an actual family member, right? So yeah, it does seem, and I don't really know what his strategy is, but here's the problem. As a retired attorney, I've been in classrooms with people like that attorney, like the defense attorneys for Rittenhouse. And yes, everyone is entitled to a defense, but the way in which people choose to go about that defense and the types of theories that they choose to advocate for speaks volumes about not the innocence or presumption of innocence, but the white supremacy that's still very much ingrained in the way we teach legal studies in this country, as well as the way in which the justice system and the legislation that people are relying upon to adjudicate works, because none of it was meant for any of us to begin with. And so I know many people have spoken this about looking for justice from this system, and we'll see how these cases turn out. But I'm very, very aggravated with the way these particular defense attorneys, and I'm someone who's usually like, yeah, I wanted to be a defense attorney, but it's pretty gross watching how they're going about defending their clients.